The mop hit the floor with its usual wet slap, and Roy Bennett pushed it forward in long, smooth strokes. 14 years he had worked with animals back on Earth. Now he cleaned floors on a space station full of creatures he could barely pronounce the names of. Life had a funny way of turning out different than expected. His cart squeaked as he rolled it down the quiet corridor. Most of the station staff had gone to sleep hours ago. The xenobiology wing always felt emptier at night, like a museum after closing time. Roy preferred it this way. Fewer people meant fewer conversations about why a former wildlife specialist was mopping floors in space. He was halfway through the main hallway when he heard a sound so small and broken that it made his hand stop moving. Roy tilted his head, listening. There was again a high-pitched cry, almost like a whimper. It came from somewhere deeper in the wing, past the observation rooms where they kept the rescued animals. Roy left his cart and followed the sound. His boots made soft thuds against the metal floor as he walked past darkened windows, showing empty enclosures. The crying grew louder with each step, not louder in volume, but more desperate, more afraid that he reached observation room 7 and stopped. Through the reinforced glass window, Roy saw them. 3 small dragons, each about the size of a large dog, huddled together in the center of an otherwise bare room. Their scales looked dull under the harsh overhead lights. One of them had its wings wrapped around the other 2, but all 3 were shaking. Their mouths opened in those terrible cries that Roy could now hear clearly through the door's speaker system. Roy checked the information panel beside the door. Draconix juveniles, orphaned when their nesting site was destroyed by a meteor strike. Brought here for observation and eventual relocation. Current status, stable but refusing food. Observation protocol, minimal contact to encourage independent adaptation. That he read that last line twice. Minimal contact, independent adaptation. The smallest dragon lifted its head and cried again. The sound went straight through Roy's chest like a blade. That he had seen this before. Back on Earth, when they brought in baby foxes whose mother had been hit by a car, or eagle chicks that fell from their nests. Young animals did not adapt to trauma by being left alone. They either died or they survived damaged. There was no strength in isolation for creatures too young to understand why they were suddenly alone. Roy looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the hallway. He looked at his wrist device, where his clearance level glowed in dim blue letters. Janitor, maintenance access only. Not authorized for specimen interaction. That he looked back at the dragons. The middle-sized one had started making a different sound now. Not quite a cry, but something worse. A hopeless sort of whine that said it had given up expecting help. Roy had heard that sound before, too. It was the sound animals made right before they stopped trying to live. His hand moved to the door panel before his brain caught up with the decision. Warning lights flashed yellow on his wrist device. Unauthorized access attempted. Security notification sent. Roy ignored it and pressed his palm against the panel anyway. The door slid open with a soft hiss. The dragon's heads snapped toward him. 6 eyes, bright as molten gold, fixed on Roy with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The largest one bared its teeth. They were small but looked sharp enough to cause damage. Smoke puffed from its nostrils in tiny clouds. Roy stepped inside slowly and let the door close behind him. He held his hands out, palms up, and kept his body low. Old habits from a lifetime ago kicked in automatically. Make yourself smaller. Move slowly. Let them see you're not a threat. Hey there, Roy said quietly. His voice sounded too loud in the sterile room, so he brought it down to almost a whisper. Hey, it's okay. I know you're scared. The largest dragon hissed at him. Roy did not move. He lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the cold floor, several feet away from the huddled group. This was their space. He was the intruder. They needed to know he understood that. I'm not going to hurt you, Roy continued in that same soft voice. I know everything is scary right now. I know you don't understand where your family went or why you're in this place. The smallest dragon was watching him with its head tilted to one side. Its crying had stopped, replaced by shallow, quick breaths. Roy could see its little chest moving rapidly under those dull scales that he started humming. An old lullaby his grandmother used to sing when he was small enough to believe the world was safe. He did not remember the words anymore, but the melody had stayed with him. Low notes that seemed to fill the empty spaces of the room. Minutes passed. Roy just sat there, humming and waiting. His legs started to go numb, but he did not move. The dragons watched him. Their breathing began to slow, matching some rhythm in the tune he was humming. The smallest one took a step forward. Then another. Roy's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his body still. He kept humming. The little dragon moved closer, its neck stretched out as if testing the air between them. Roy could see now that its scales were not dull everywhere. There were patches of deep blue and silver that caught the light when it moved. The dragon took one more step and pressed its wedge-shaped head against Roy's chest. The crying stopped completely. The little creature's body trembled against him, but different now. Not from fear, from relief, from finally feeling safe enough to let the terror drain away. Roy slowly, carefully, brought one hand up to rest on its back. The scales were warm and surprisingly soft at the edges. The other two dragons watched this for several heartbeats. Then they moved too, shuffling forward until all three were pressed against Roy in a pile of wings and tails and warm bodies. They made small, chirping sounds now, almost like purrs. Roy looked up at the camera in the corner of the room. A red light blinked steadily, recording everything. He was definitely going to get fired for this. Maybe worse. But the three dragons' arms had finally stopped crying, and Roy found he could not bring himself to care about cameras or protocols or consequences. Some things were more important than rules. Roy had fallen asleep at some point during the night. He woke up with his back against the wall, and three dragons sprawled across his lap like oversized cats. His legs had gone completely numb, and his neck hurt from the awkward angle, but he found himself smiling anyway. The smallest dragon, still pressed against his chest, opened one golden eye and made a soft chirping sound. Up close, Roy could see the individual scales along its snout, each one perfectly formed and overlapping like tiny shields. Beautiful, really. He wondered how anyone could look at these creatures and decide they needed less comfort rather than more. The door hissed open. Roy looked up to see Administrator Quilvin standing in the doorway. The insectoid's compound eyes reflected the light in dozens of tiny points. Its mandibles clicked together in what Roy had learned meant displeasure. "Mr. Bennett," Quilvin said, its voice buzzing through its translator device. "You have created a significant problem." Roy carefully shifted the dragons off his lap. They made protesting sounds, but moved, stretching their wings and yawning to show those needle-sharp teeth. The largest one positioned itself between Roy and Quilvin, still protective despite having accepted Roy during the night. "They were crying," Roy said simply, climbing to his feet. His legs screamed with pins and needles as blood flow returned. "They were adapting," Quilvin corrected. "The Galactic Conservation Bureau has specific protocols for orphan juveniles. These protocols exist for important reasons." Roy brushed dragon shed scales off his janitor uniform. "What reasons?" "These are babies. They watch their family die. You think leaving them alone in a bare room teaches them anything except that the universe is a cruel place?" Quilvin's antennae twitched. "I think you are projecting Earth mammal psychology onto beings you do not understand. Dragons are reptilian. They are solitary by nature once they leave the egg. These three are huddled together." Roy pointed at the dragons, who had indeed moved back into a tight group. "Does that look solitary to you?" Before Quilvin could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway. This one had 4 arms and skin that shifted between blue and green, depending on the angle of light. Roy recognized Dr. Prill from the Xenobiology department. The amphibian scientist moved past Quilvin without ceremony and approached the dragons with a scanning device held in 2 of its hands. "Fascinating," Prill murmured, reading the data. "Administrator, look at these readings." Quilvin clicked over to peer at the device. Roy waited, still positioned protectively near the dragons, even though he knew he had no real authority here. He was probably minutes away from being escorted off the station. "Their stress hormone levels have dropped 87%, Prill said, genuine excitement in its translated voice. "Their scale luminosity index has improved by 43 points. Their heart rates are within normal juvenile ranges for the first time since arrival. Correlation does not imply, Quilvin began. And they ate. Prill interrupted, pointing to a bowl in the corner that Roy had not noticed before. It was empty now, but showed signs of having contained food. 3 days they refused all nutrition. Now the bowl is clean. Roy felt a small surge of pride, which he immediately felt silly about. He had not done anything except sit with them. Still, knowing they had eaten felt important somehow. Quilvin was quiet for a moment, its mandibles working. This is one night of data. Hardly conclusive. Then let us gather more data, Prill said. Its skin flashed a bright green that Roy guessed meant enthusiasm. I propose we continue this as a controlled study. Mr. Bennett continues his interactions with the juveniles. We monitor their development against historical data for orphan Draconix young. Absolutely not, Quilvin said immediately. He is a janitor, not a xenobiologist. He has no training in. He has 14 years of experience with wildlife rehabilitation, Prill said. Roy blinked, surprised the doctor knew this. I accessed his employment history from Earth. He ran a successful center for orphaned and injured animals before funding collapsed. His methods were considered highly effective. Quilvin turned all its eyes on Roy. Is this true? Roy shrugged. I worked with Earth animals. These are dragons from another planet. Hardly the same thing. Yet your instincts appear sound, Prill said. Do you know what our success rate is with orphan Draconix juveniles using current protocols? 37%. The rest die from what we categorize as failure to thrive. They simply give up and stop living. The number hit Roy like a punch. 37%. That meant nearly 2 out of every 3 orphan dragons died, not from injury or illness, but from loneliness, from trauma, from being left alone with their fear. What exactly are you proposing, Doctor? Quilvin asked. A trial period. 30 days. Mr. Bennett becomes the primary caregiver for these 3 juveniles while continuing his other duties. We monitor everything. If their development suffers, we return to standard protocol. If it improves, we have discovered something that could change conservation efforts across the galaxy. The smallest dragon had walked over to Roy and was now leaning against his leg. He reached down automatically to scratch behind its head ridge. The dragon made a rumbling sound deep in its chest, almost like a cat purring. Quilvin watched this interaction with its unreadable compound eyes. And if something goes wrong, if they become too dependent on human contact, if they fail to develop proper survival instincts, then I take full responsibility, Roy said. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but he meant them. If this doesn't work, the blame is mine. Your responsibility is not what concerns me, Quilvin said. These juveniles are an endangered species. Their value to the galaxy exceeds your consequences, which is exactly why we should try something different, Roy replied. Your current method is killing them. At least this way they have a chance. The silence stretched out. The dragons seemed to sense the tension because they moved closer to Roy, the largest one making a low warning rumble at Quilvin, protecting him now, just as he had tried to protect them. Finally, Quilvin's mandibles clicked in a pattern Roy did not recognize. 30 days, the administrator said, but you will follow Dr. Prill's guidelines. You will submit to constant monitoring. And if there is any sign that these juveniles are being harmed by your methods, this experiment ends immediately. Understood, Roy said. Quilvin turned to leave, then paused at the door. For your sake, Mr. Bennett, I hope your instincts are as good as Dr. Prill believes. Because if those juveniles die, it will not be protocol that failed them. It will be you. The door slid shut behind the administrator. Prill made a sound that might have been a chuckle. Do not worry about Quilvin. The administrator is simply concerned. 3 days ago, these juveniles were nearly comatose. Now look at them. Roy looked. All 3 dragons were arranged around him like petals around a flower. Their scales had already begun to show more color, more life. The smallest one was actually playing, pouncing at its own tail. What do I do now? Roy asked. Feed them. Talk to them. Help them remember how to be alive, Prill said. In other words, do what you have already been doing. The doctor left, and Roy was alone with 3 dragons who had somehow become his responsibility. He sat down on the floor, and immediately all 3 climbed into his lap again, fighting for the best position against his chest. Roy laughed, a sound he had not made in months. Maybe longer. "All right then," he said to them. "Let us figure this out together." 2 weeks passed faster than Roy expected. His days now split between mopping floors and raising dragons. He named them because calling them Juvenile 1 and Juvenile 2 felt wrong. The smallest became Pip because it made little peeping sounds when happy. The middle one was Ash for its gray-silver scales. The largest was Soot, darker than the others and somehow gentler despite its size. Roy learned their personalities quickly. Pip explored everything, climbing into his cleaning cart and investigating every corner of their expanded enclosure. Ash watched everything with those sharp golden eyes, learning faster than its siblings. Soot stayed close to Roy, always making sure he was within sight. The dragons grew visibly stronger each day. Their scales brightened until they shone like metal in sunlight. They started play fighting, rolling across the floor in tangles of wings and tails. They ate without hesitation now, tearing into their food with enthusiasm that made Dr. Prill beam during daily examinations. Other staff members began visiting to watch. Some brought colleagues from other departments. Word spread through the station about the human who was raising dragons like they were puppies. Roy was teaching Pip not to chew on power cables when the visitors arrived. 3 Draconix adults entered the observation area, escorted by Administrator Quilvin. Roy had never seen adult members of the dragon species before. They were massive, each one easily twice his height, even when walking on all fours. Their scales looked like armor plating, dark and thick and scarred from decades of life. When they moved, Roy could hear the click of claws on metal flooring. The lead dragon had eyes that glowed like embers. It studied Roy through the observation window with an expression he could not read. "That is Elder Scareth," Dr. Prill whispered, appearing beside Roy. "A representative of the Draconix Council. They have come to evaluate the juveniles." Roy felt his stomach tighten. Pip had climbed onto his shoulder and was chirping in his ear. Ash and Soot pressed against his legs, suddenly quiet. Quilvin activated the intercom. "Mr. Bennett, please bring the juveniles to the observation window." Roy walked over slowly, the 3 dragons following. Through the glass, he could see Scareth lean closer. The elder dragon's nostrils flared, scenting the air. "They smell of human," Scareth said. The translator made its voice sound like grinding stones. "They behave like human pets. They behave like healthy juvenile dragons," Dr. Prill countered. "Their development exceeds all normal parameters. They are thriving." "They are weak," Scareth replied. "Look how they cling to the human." A proper dragon juvenile learns independence, learns strength through hardship. Roy felt anger rise in his chest. He had dealt with people like this back on Earth. People who confused cruelty with toughness, who thought suffering built character. "They are not weak," Roy said through the intercom. "They are learning. There's a difference." Scareth's eyes fixed on him. "You presume to tell me about my own species, human? I'm telling you what I see," Roy said. "These 3 watch out for each other. They communicate. They solve problems. Yesterday, Ash figured out how to open the food dispenser by watching me do it once. Pip created a game where they practice flying in formation. Soot has started making different sounds to mean different things. They're not just surviving. They are growing dependent," Scareth said. "What happens when you are gone? When there is no human to comfort them? They will be helpless, or they will have learned that the universe is not entirely hostile," Roy replied. "That sometimes help exists. That working together is not weakness." One of the other adult dragons, slightly smaller than Scareth, moved closer to the window. Its scales were lighter, more silver than black. It studied the juveniles with what looked like sadness in its eyes. "Scareth," this dragon said quietly, "perhaps we should see how they behave, not just how they look." Scareth made a rumbling sound that did not need translation. Displeasure. But the elder stepped back and gestured for the observation to continue. Dr. Prill brought in a puzzle feeder, one designed to test problem-solving skills. It was a cube with food hidden inside, accessible only through a series of sliding panels that had to be moved in the right sequence. Roy placed it on the floor and stepped back. The juveniles approached cautiously. Pip tried to smash it with its front claws. When that did not work, Ash started examining the panels. The middle dragon chirped at its siblings, and they watched as Ash demonstrated sliding one panel, then another. Soon all three were working together, taking turns moving pieces until the cube opened and revealed the food inside. They ate together, sharing equally, making happy sounds. Through the window, Roy saw the silver-scaled dragon lower its head. The third adult dragon, who had not spoken yet, shifted its weight from foot to foot. A trick, Scareth said, taught by the human. I did not teach them that, Roy said truthfully. I have never seen that puzzle before. Dr. Prill brought it specifically for this test. Prill nodded confirmation. The juveniles solved it through observation and cooperation. Both are signs of advanced cognitive development. It is not the dragon way, Scareth insisted. Perhaps it should be, the silver dragon said quietly. Scareth turned on its companion. You forget our history, Mareth. You forget what made our species strong. The silver dragon, Mareth, met Scareth's gaze without flinching. I forget nothing. I remember when we were more than survivors. Before the plague. Before we lost so many that our hatchlings had to raise themselves or die. We made a virtue of necessity, Scareth. We called our trauma tradition. The silence that followed felt heavy. Roy did not understand all the context, but he understood the weight of those words. Something had happened in the dragon's past. Something that changed how they raised their young. These juveniles are healthy, Mareth continued. Look at them. Truly look. When did you last see orphan hatchlings with such bright scales? With such energy? The human has not made them weak. He has made them whole. And what happens when they return to our world? Scareth demanded. When they must face real challenges, real dangers? Will they cry for their human? Will they be helpless because they never learned to be alone? They will remember they are not alone, Roy said. They will remember that help exists, that caring for each other makes them stronger, not weaker. Is that really such a terrible thing to learn? Scareth stared at him for a long moment. Then the elder dragon turned and walked away without another word. The third adult dragon followed, but Mareth stayed. The silver dragon pressed close to the observation window, and the three juveniles came over to investigate. Through the glass, the elder dragon and the babies touched noses. Thank you, Mareth said quietly, looking at Roy, for showing us what we had forgotten. The elder dragon left, and Roy was alone with Dr. Prill and three baby dragons who were already play fighting again, the tension of the visit forgotten. That went better than expected, Prill said. Roy was not so sure. The way Scareth had left felt less like acceptance and more like a brewing storm. But the three juveniles were safe for now. That was enough for now. News traveled fast through the galactic network. Within days of the Draconix Elder's visit, Roy found himself the subject of articles and opinion pieces across dozens of worlds. Some called him a revolutionary. Others called him dangerous. Most just called him the human who hugged dragons. The three juveniles were now the size of large horses. Their wings had strengthened enough for short flights across the biodome where they spent their afternoons. Roy watched Pip attempt a barrel roll and crash into a tree with more enthusiasm than skill. Ash landed gracefully on a rock and preened as if the whole thing had been a planned lesson. Sid circled back to check on Roy before joining the others. They do not need you anymore, a voice said behind him. Roy turned to find Mareth, the silver dragon elder, standing at the biodome entrance. In daylight, the elder's scars were more visible, long lines across the snout and neck. A damaged wing that sat at a slightly wrong angle. Marks of a life lived hard. They still sleep curled up against me every night, Roy said. So I think they still need me a little. Perhaps. Mareth walked closer, moving with surprising quiet for such a large creature. Or perhaps you need them. The words hit closer than Roy wanted to admit. He had been happy these past weeks. Really happy. The kind of happiness he thought he had lost back on Earth when his rehabilitation center closed, and he realized no one would fund his work anymore. Animals did not make money. Compassion did not pay bills. Dr. Prill tells me you have received formal complaints, Mareth said. 17 at last count, Roy confirmed. Mostly from traditionalist groups. They think I am ruining the juveniles by making them soft. And what do you think? Roy watched Pip chase Ash through the artificial sky. I think they are learning to be dragons. Just not the kind of dragons that Scareth wants them to be. Mareth made a sound like wind through caves. Scareth lost an entire clutch of hatchlings once. 7 eggs. All hatched successfully. All died within 2 months. The protocols said minimal contact. Scareth followed the protocols. Roy felt his chest tighten. I did not know. Most do not. Scareth believes that following the rules more strictly would have saved them. That any deviation from tradition is betrayal of their memory. It is easier to believe that than to accept the rules themselves might be wrong. Is that why you support what I'm doing? Mareth looked at him with eyes that held centuries. I support it because I am old enough to remember the before times, when dragon parents stayed with their hatchlings. When we taught our young through guidance, not abandonment. We did not lose that because we wanted to. We lost it because plague killed most of the adults. The survivors were too few to care for all the orphaned young. So the young learned to survive alone, and we called it strength. We had to, but then we forgot it was ever different. Roy had not expected that. He knew the dragons had a complicated history, but not this. Not that their entire approach to raising young came from tragedy, not tradition. Why not change it back? Roy asked. If you remember the old ways, why not teach them? Because I am one voice against thousands who believe the current way is the only way. Because suggesting change means admitting we have been wrong for a very long time. Because Scareth is not alone in losing hatchlings to a system we are afraid to question. Soot had landed near them and was watching the conversation with interest. The dark dragon walked over and nudged Roy's hand with its nose. Roy scratched behind its head ridge automatically. They do that with you, Mareth observed. Seek touch. Seek comfort. Even now, when they are large enough to be independent. Is that bad? It is honest, Mareth said. They trust you. They know you will not hurt them. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. An alarm sounded across the biodome. Not loud, but urgent. Dr. Prill's voice came through Roy's communication device. Mr. Bennett, please return to the main facility immediately. We have a situation. Roy's stomach dropped. He called to the juveniles, who came immediately, sensing something wrong. Together, they rushed back through the connecting corridor to the main station. Administrator Quilvin waited in the central hub, along with Dr. Prill and a security team. And Scareth, flanked by 2 other dragons Roy did not recognize. What is happening? Roy demanded. Elder Scareth has filed a formal petition with the Galactic Conservation Bureau, Quilvin said. Its mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of stress. They are demanding custody of the juveniles. Immediately. On what grounds? Roy asked, though he already knew. Scareth stepped forward. On the grounds that they are being raised improperly. That they are being made dependent on a species not their own. That their natural development is being stunted by human interference. Their development is exceeding every benchmark, Dr. Prill protested. By human standards, Scareth said. Not by ours. These juveniles will return to our world eventually. They must be prepared for dragon society. For dragon challenges. Not for a universe where humans coddle them. Pip hissed at Scareth. The juvenile scales flared brighter, a threat display Roy had never seen before. Ash and Soot moved to flank their sibling, forming a protective line between Roy and the elder dragon. You see, Scareth said, they react with aggression to their own kind. They identify with the human, not with their species. This is exactly the problem. They are protecting someone they care about, Roy said. That is not a problem. That is loyalty. It is confusion, Scareth replied, and it will get them killed when they face real threats. I'm taking custody now. The Bureau has approved my petition. Roy looked at Dr. Prill, who nodded sadly. The Bureau has authority in these matters. Unless we can provide evidence of harm in transferring custody, their decision stands. Harm. Roy felt desperate. They are happy. They are healthy. Taking them away from everything familiar is what will cause harm. Then they will learn what all dragons must learn, Scareth said. That nothing is permanent. That attachment leads to pain. That strength comes from standing alone. Mareth had entered the hub during the argument. The silver dragon moved between Scareth and the juveniles. This is wrong, Scareth. Look at them. They are not weak. They are bonded. There is a difference. You are soft, Mareth. You always were. Is why your clutch also died. The words hung in the air like poison. Mareth's entire body went rigid. Roy saw something break behind the elder dragon's eyes. My clutch died because I followed your protocols, Mareth said quietly. Because I listened when you said attachment was weakness. Because I left them alone to adapt, and they died afraid and lonely. I will not watch it happen again. Scareth made a dismissive sound. Your guilt does not change reality. These juveniles come with me. Now, the two dragons Scareth had brought with him moved toward Pip, Ash, and Soot. The juveniles pressed against Roy, making frightened sounds he had not heard since that first night. Roy stepped in front of them. No, you have no authority here, human, Scareth said. Maybe not, but I am not letting you take them. Security moved forward, uncertain. Quilvin's mandibles worked frantically. Dr. Prill looked torn between science and compassion. And then Pip did something unexpected. The smallest juvenile stepped forward and opened its mouth. Not to bite, to speak. The sound that came out was broken, half chirp and half word, but unmistakable. No, everyone froze. Dragons did not speak Common Galactic. Their mouths were not shaped for it. They had their own language of growls and clicks and roars, but Pip had been listening to Roy for weeks. Listening to him talk, reading stories at night, explaining things throughout the day, and somehow, impossibly, the juvenile had learned. No take, Pip said, the words garbled but clear enough. Stay, Roy. Ash moved forward next. Stay. Please stay. So it made a sound that might have been family. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Roy saw Scareth's expression shift through several emotions. Shock, anger, and something else. Something that might have been doubt. The discovery that the juveniles could speak changed everything. Within hours, the station was flooded with linguists, xenobiologists, and Galactic Council representatives. Everyone wanted to see the dragons who learn a language not their own. Scareth's petition was suspended pending a formal hearing. Roy should have felt relieved, but instead he felt numb. Because a hearing meant judges and testimony and a decision that might still take the juveniles away. It just meant more time before the inevitable. He sat in the biodome with Pip, Ash, and Soot curled around him like always. But nothing felt the same. The three dragons sensed his worry and kept making questioning sounds, nuzzling against him for reassurance he could not quite give. You taught them language, Dr. Prill said, settling nearby with several recording devices. In 3 weeks, you taught them to speak Common Galactic. Do you understand what that means? That they are smart. Roy replied tiredly. That they were listening, learning, engaging with the world around them at a level we have never documented in juvenile dragons. Prill's skin flashed excited colors. Scareth's argument was that your methods stunt development. But this proves the opposite. Your methods accelerated their cognitive growth beyond anything we thought possible. Will it matter at the hearing? Prill's colors dimmed. I do not know. The law is complicated, and politics more so. The hearing took place 3 days later in the station's assembly hall. Roy had never seen so many different species in one room. The judges were a panel of 5, a crystalline being that communicated through light pulses, 2 humanoids from different worlds, something that looked like a floating jellyfish, and a robot representing synthetic intelligence. Scareth presented first. The elder dragon's argument was simple. The juveniles were Draconics. They should be raised by Draconics methods, on the Draconics homeworld, learning Draconics culture. Anything else was cultural erasure. Human interference in something humans had no right to change. Several other dragons testified in support. They showed statistics about traditional raising methods. They talked about the importance of hardship in building character. They showed images of adult dragons who had survived the harsh protocols and thrived. What they did not show were the numbers of juveniles who did not survive. Roy noticed that absence like a missing tooth. When it was Roy's turn to speak, he felt every eye in the room on him. He was not good at public speaking, never had been. He preferred animals to crowds for exactly this reason. I do not have fancy statistics, Roy said. I just know what I saw. 3 baby dragons crying in an empty room. So terrified they had stopped eating. Stopped trying. I did what anyone with half a heart would do. I sat with them until they stopped being afraid. He gestured to where the juveniles waited with Dr. Prill. Look at them now. Healthy, happy, learning, growing. They are not damaged by kindness. They are thriving because of it. But will they be able to function in dragon society? One of the judges asked. Elder Scareth raises a valid concern about cultural preparedness. Roy looked at Scareth. I think you should ask them yourself. They can answer now. The chamber erupted in murmurs. The lead judge, one of the humanoids, called for order. The juveniles will be allowed to testify if they wish. This is unprecedented, but so is this entire situation. Pip stepped forward first, wings held high. The juvenile had grown confident over the weeks, no longer the tiny, crying thing from that first night. We want to stay with Roy. Learn both. Dragon and human and other. Want to see everything. Ash came next, always more articulate. Roy, teach us safe. Teach us trust. Teach us strong together, not strong alone. That bad? To learn more than one way. Soot, who spoke least of all, simply said, Roy family. We family. Why take family? The silence that followed felt different than before. Roy saw several judges exchange glances. Even Scareth seemed shaken, though the elder dragon hit it quickly. Then Mareth stood. The silver dragon had been sitting quietly in the observer section, but now moved forward to the testimony area. I invoke elder privilege to speak, Mareth said. The judges consulted briefly and nodded. Elder privilege was an old right, rarely used, that allowed senior members of a species to present historical context in legal matters. You want to know if these juveniles will function in dragon society, Mareth began. You want to know if human raising methods damage dragon nature. I am here to tell you that you are asking the wrong questions. Mareth turned to address the entire assembly. 5,000 years ago, plague killed 80% of adult dragons. Hatchlings were left orphaned by the millions. There were not enough adults to care for them all, so the young learned to survive alone or they died. We praised the survivors and called their trauma strength. We made protocols from our failures and named them tradition. The murmur through the crowd grew louder. Other dragons in the audience shifted uncomfortably. But before the plague, we raised our young differently. Parents stayed with hatchlings, taught them, comforted them, built bonds that lasted lifetimes. We were not weaker then. We were not soft. We were whole. Maretha's voice carried authority that even Scareth could not dismiss. This human did not impose foreign methods on dragon young. He stumbled onto our own forgotten ways. And the juveniles responded because dragon nature remembers what dragon culture forgot. Scareth stood abruptly. You speak of ancient history. The galaxy has changed. Dragons have changed. We cannot go back. I am not suggesting we go back, Mareth said. I am suggesting we go forward. Take the best of what we were and combine it with the best of what we learned. These juveniles are not damaged by having both. They are enriched by it. One of the judges, the crystalline being, pulsed with light. The translator rendered it as speech. The question before us is not whether human methods work. Clearly they do. The question is whether we have the right to impose them. Roy, not impose, Pip said suddenly. We choose. We want learn. We want grow. We choose Roy, and Roy choose us. Why others decide? Roy felt his throat tighten. He had not taught Pip that argument. The juvenile had reasoned it independently. The floating jellyfish judge spoke next. The juvenile raises an interesting point. At what age do we recognize individual choice? These 3 demonstrate clear cognitive function and self-awareness. Do they not have the right to choose their own path? They are children, Scareth said. Children cannot make such choices. They are children who can speak 3 languages, solve complex puzzles, and articulate their own needs, the robot judge replied. At what point does their opinion matter? The debate continued for another hour. Legal precedents were cited. Philosophers were quoted. Arguments grew heated. But Roy noticed something. The tone had shifted. It was no longer about whether his methods worked. It was about autonomy. Choice. What rights juveniles had to decide their own future. Finally, the judges called for a recess to deliberate. Roy returned to the waiting area with the juveniles pressed against him. "Did we do good?" Ash asked. "You did perfect," Roy said. Mareth approached, with Scareth close behind. The two elder dragons faced each other with decades of history between them. "You have poisoned the juveniles against their own kind," Scareth said to Roy. "They will never fully be dragons now. Or they will be something better," Mareth replied. "Dragons who can bridge worlds, who can teach us what we lost. And what will you do when the human leaves?" Scareth demanded. "When he grows old and dies, and they are alone again, you're setting them up for greater pain." Roy had not let himself think about that. But it was true. Humans lived shorter lives than dragons. These three would outlive him by centuries. "Then they will grieve," Roy said quietly. "And they will remember they were loved. And they will know how to love others in turn." "That seems like a good legacy to me." Scareth stared at him for a long moment. Then the elder dragon turned and walked away without another word. The judges returned an hour later with their decision. The lead judge stood, and the assembly hall fell silent. "This panel has reached a decision. The juveniles will remain in the care of Roy Bennett for the duration of their developmental period. However, they will also receive cultural education from Elder Mareth and spend time learning Draconic traditions. Upon reaching maturity, the juveniles themselves will choose where and how they wish to live." Roy felt the tension drain from his body. Beside him, the three juveniles made happy chirping sounds and pressed closer. It was not a complete victory, but it was enough. They had time. Scareth rose from the audience section. "This is a mistake. You will see. Those juveniles will be damaged by this decision. Then we will learn from that mistake," the judge replied. "But we will not return to a system that has a 63% failure rate simply because it is familiar." The elder dragon left without another word, followed by several supporters. But Roy noticed that not all the dragons left. Some stayed, watching the juveniles with expressions that ranged from curiosity to hope. Over the following months, a new pattern emerged. Roy continued his work with the juveniles each day, teaching them, playing with them, being the steady presence they needed. But now Mareth came regularly too, teaching dragon history and culture, teaching them to speak proper Draconics, not just common galactic, teaching them the songs and stories that had been passed down for generations. The juveniles absorbed it all. They were like sponges, eager for every piece of knowledge. They learned to hunt from Mareth and to show compassion from Roy. They learned dragon pride and human empathy. They became something new, something that belonged to both worlds and neither. Other orphan dragons began arriving at the station. Word had spread about the program's success. Roy found himself training other caregivers, teaching them the methods that worked. Not just humans, but beings from a dozen different species who wanted to help. The empty observation rooms filled with young dragons, all receiving both comfort and cultural education. The program expanded beyond dragons. Other species requested similar approaches for their own orphaned young. Dr. Prill was promoted to head an entire new department focused on what they called integrated care development. Roy became the director of interspecies comfort programs, though he still insisted on mopping floors sometimes because it helped him think. Pip, Ash, and Soot grew larger with each passing month. Soon they were the size of small shuttles. Their scales shone like polished metal. Their wings could carry them for miles. They were magnificent, but they still slept near Roy every night, even though they barely fit in the biodome anymore. One evening, nearly a year after that first night, Roy sat watching the sunset through the station's observation window. Pip landed beside him, the impact shaking the floor. "Roy sad?" the dragon asked. Pip's common galactic had become nearly perfect over the months. "Not sad," Roy said. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how big you have all gotten. About how soon you will not need me anymore." Pip made a snorting sound that Roy had learned meant amusement. "We always need you, just different ways. Like you always need us. What did you get so wise? You teach us. Mireth, teach us." We learn from everyone. They make us wise. Ash and Soot landed nearby, folding their enormous wings. The three dragons settled around Roy like they had that very first night, though now their heads were level with his chest instead of pressed against it. "Mareth say we can go home soon," Ash said. "To Dragon World. See where we come from." Roy felt his chest tighten, but nodded. "You should. It is important to know your roots." "You come too," Sid asked hopefully. "If you want me there." "Of course want," Pip said. "You family. Families stay together." The word family hit Roy hard. He had not had real family in years. His parents were gone. His sister had stopped talking to him when he spent their inheritance on the rehabilitation center that failed. He had been alone for so long he forgot what belonging felt like. Until three crying dragons changed everything that a month later, they stood on the landing platform of the Draconix homeworld. Roy had never seen anything like it. Mountains of black stone that touched the clouds. Valleys filled with crystal formations that sang in the wind. And dragons. Hundreds of them, flying through the sky like schools of massive, beautiful fish. Scareth waited at the landing pad, along with a delegation of dragon elders. The old dragon looked the same, scarred and stern and disapproving. "So you have brought them home," Scareth said. "Let us see how they compare to properly raised dragons." What followed was a series of tests. Flight challenges, hunting exercises, problem-solving tasks. Pip, Ash, and Soot performed admirably, but Roy noticed they did things differently than the other young dragons. When they hunted, they worked together instead of competing. When they solved puzzles, they talked through strategies. When they flew, they watched out for each other. Scareth saw it too. They are too cooperative, too soft. A dragon must be able to stand alone. "They can stand alone," Mareth said. The silver dragon had accompanied them to the homeworld. "They simply choose not to when there is another option. That is not weakness. That is wisdom." A young dragon, maybe twice the juvenile's age, landed nearby. It was injured, one wing held at an awkward angle. The local dragons moved away from it, giving it space to manage alone. That was the way. An injured dragon recovered independently, or it did not recover at all, but Soot did not move away. The gentle, dark dragon approached the injured one carefully, making soft sounds. Roy had seen this before. Soot had developed an ability to sense pain in others and respond to it. The injured dragon hissed a warning, but Soot did not retreat. Instead, Soot began humming. The same lullaby Roy had hummed that first night. The injured dragon's aggressive posture slowly relaxed. Soot settled nearby, offering presents without demanding anything. Other dragons watched this interaction with confusion, some with disapproval, but Roy saw a few younger ones watching with something else. Interest, maybe even longing. Over the next weeks, something shifted in the dragon community. Young dragons began approaching Pip, Ash, and Soot, asking questions about their time with Roy, about what they learned, about why they were different. The three juveniles shared everything freely, teaching the cooperation and empathy they had learned. Not all the older dragons approved. Scareth certainly did not. But Roy noticed that fewer young dragons were dying of failure to thrive. The survival rate for orphan dragons on the homeworld was improving slowly, but measurably. One evening, Scareth found Roy sitting alone near the Crystal Valleys. "You have changed things here," the elder dragon said. "Whether for better or worse remains to be seen." "I just taught three scared babies that they were not alone," Roy replied. "Everything else was them. They will outlive you by centuries. They will watch you age and die. You have given them that pain." "Yes, and they will also have centuries of life ahead of them, knowing that they are capable of love, that they can form bonds that matter, that the universe holds kindness as well as cruelty. I think that trait is worth it." Scareth was quiet for a long moment. "My hatchlings died because I was afraid to show them weakness. I thought strength meant distance. I was wrong." The admission shocked Roy more than anything else that had happened. "I still believe you are changing us in ways we may regret," Scareth continued. "But I can no longer deny that what we were doing was failing. Perhaps your way is not the answer, but perhaps our way was not either. Perhaps the answer is somewhere between." The elder dragon left, and Roy sat watching the crystal valleys sing their wordless songs. Pip found him there later, landing with surprising grace for a creature so large. Mireth say you leave soon. Go back to station, Pip said. I have other dragons to help. The program has expanded, but I will visit. I promise. We know. We can visit too. Bring others. Teach them what we learned. Make bridge between human world and dragon world. Roy smiled. When did you get so grown up? You teach us to grow. Teach us to care. Teach us to be more than just survive. Pip pressed a massive head against Roy's chest, just like that first night. You teach us to live. Now we teach others. Your lesson keep going. Forever. Ash and Soot joined them, and the four of them sat together as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Roy thought about that first night, about 3 terrified dragons crying in an empty room, about a broken man with a mop who decided rules mattered less than compassion, about how one small act of kindness had somehow grown into something larger than he ever imagined. Maybe he did not save the dragons. Maybe they saved each other. The stars shone brighter, and somewhere in the distance, young dragons were learning that strength and love were not opposites. That you could be both fierce and gentle. That the universe was harsh, but you did not have to face it alone. Roy closed his eyes and listened to the sound of 3 dragons breathing beside him, alive and whole and ready to change their world. IT was enough, that IT was everything.